Some weeks ago, I did two videos that addressed the change in our society that is pushing what I call the trans agenda. This is the belief that men, upon their proclamation without any scientific proof or changes to their body of a surgical nature, can proclaim themselves to be a woman, and that women would be forced to allow these individuals into their personal and private spaces, such as locker rooms, dressing rooms, and restrooms. This has caused some concern as now this movement has pushed into the public school system, and parents without any knowledge or consent are having their children trained and programmed into accepting the trans movement's belief that there are such things as men with vaginas and women with penises. This is what's going on. There's also a lot of drugs being given to children to halt their development as they are supposed to be progressing through puberty as a part of their adolescence and growth into teens and adulthood. They're being given these drugs that are off-label use, and it's changing their bodies, and sometimes with the concern that this is forever, unknown damage, unknown risk. None of this is all an experiment on your children. This whole thing is an experiment. So what I did was ask for experts in this field, for people to recommend names to me. Some came through. A few I reached out to, I wasn't able to make contact with them, or we couldn't line up our schedules. But I did manage to hook up an interview with Stephanie Davis-Arai, and what follows is the half hour or so discussion that we had about the trans movement, the trans agenda, and its impact on our children. I think this is very important information, especially if you are a parent and this may be something that you have to deal with personally, or that your child will have to deal with as a peer in their school or in their social circle. So this is good information for everyone to have. There are also some recommendations for websites and other resources for medical professionals that you can find, which we will put in the show description below. Please enjoy this discussion, and I welcome your comments below. Thank you for listening. Okay, it's recording. Well, everyone, this lovely lady on the screen here is Stephanie Davis-Arai.
Arai.
Arai. She's a communication skills expert and a parenting consultant, a teacher, trainer, a writer, a speaker, and a women's rights campaigner. Her name was recommended to me after the trans videos that I did because of her work on transgendertrend.com. And she's done a lot of research on children and the impact of this trans movement on young people. She also contributed a chapter to the best-selling book, Transgender Children and Young People, Born in Your Own Body, published by Cambridge Scholars. So I invite you to, I'll be putting up the links to her website, transgendertrend.com, and then of course the one with her name on it. And we'll put that up on the end of the slide so you can click them at the end of this interview. Did I leave anything out? Is there anything else you would like to say?
That's fine. That's introduced me.
Well, I wanted to, you came highly recommended from several different people that said, you got to talk to this woman about what's going on with the children and the impact that the trans movement is having on them, and how they're trying to push to have it in schools. So I wanted to start by asking you about the drugs that the children are being given, these things called puberty blockers. It seems to be growing in popularity for this off-label use. And I wanted to get your take on that.
Yes, GnRH analogs is what they are. They're basically anti-cancer drugs. So they were developed, anti-cancer, yeah. They were developed to treat late-stage prostate cancer in men. So they are, they're used on label for that treatment. What they do is they overstimulate the pituitary gland, and that causes it to shut down. It causes it to shut down the production of gonadal testosterone production in males, and it causes a kind of pseudo-menopause in females. So they're used to treat prostate cancer and also to overstimulate the ovaries as part of fertility treatment in women. And they have been used for decades to treat precocious puberty. So in that use, it's mostly girls who are treated for precocious puberty.
Can you explain what that is, though, for listeners who may be unfamiliar
if
with that term?
If a girl starts puberty at age 6 or 7, you know, sometimes even age 5, then these drugs are given to suppress puberty.
Okay.
And when we're quoted research and told that these drugs are completely safe, that's based on use for precocious puberty. So one thing is, actually, there is evidence which is recently coming from the US, which shows that there are long-term serious health effects on some women who were given these puberty blockers for precocious puberty. So muscle and bone fatigue, depression, weakness, those sorts of long-term issues. So that evidence has only recently, last year, been emerging from the States. So that's one thing. The other thing is that using drugs for precocious puberty, once you stop puberty blockers, it takes about a year for puberty to resume. So these very young children resume puberty at the normal age that you would start puberty. So in girls, that's around 10, maybe even 10, 11, 12. For boys, it tends to be 1 or 2 years later.
Okay.
The problem is, if you're using, there are no studies on these drugs used for normal starting puberty. So
that's what I was wondering. So they're normally treated for someone who's suffering from an affliction, but now they're giving it to normal, healthy children with like no studies.
Yeah, I mean, they're administered for what is seen as a physical problem, you know, the early onset of puberty, and, you know, that can create physical problems and you know, later in life. So there is a reason for using those drugs in you know, early onset puberty, although I think there are some issues with that as well. But when you use the drugs for normal puberty, when there are no physical problems, and we're told that they're completely reversible and they have no effect, and they're just used to buy time. In other words, they completely block a child's pubertal development, so sexual maturation.
So in other words, it's keeping them in a childlike state.
A childlike state. And in fact, what we're seeing is that once a child goes on to this medical pathway, they don't change their minds. There have been studies out of the States and Holland showing 100% stay on puberty blockers until age 16 and then progress to cross-sex hormones. In the UK, it's over 90% at the Tavistock Gender Clinic. So there are huge concerns that once, and of course, you're expecting children to make a decision when they're still really children. We know that the children who come to terms with the sex they were born, that tends to happen during puberty, because that sexual development, you know, it changes you, it changes your brain, it changes your understanding of yourself. So if we block that chance for children to develop and change, then it's sort of inevitable, really, that more children will not change their minds, they will stay. But the issue of it being, these drugs being completely reversible, there is no evidence, because one, so few children come off puberty blockers once they start, that there have been no, you know, the number of children who stop is too small to do proper clinical trials, so we haven't got the evidence. But also, if you think of a child, say, at age 10, because it's that's around Tanner stage 2 of puberty that puberty blockers are administered. and that means just when the first signs of puberty are becoming apparent. So that child starts puberty blockers at age 10. 5 years later, say age 15, thinks, oh, I made a mistake, and goes off puberty blockers. Well, that child has missed the window for puberty. A puberty starting at age 15 is not the same as a puberty that would have naturally started at the age of 10. So we're
Exactly.
looking at the example of Jazz Jennings, for example, in the US, is a boy who took puberty blockers, is now age 16 and has the genitals of a toddler. Now, if Jazz decided at this age, no, I won't go on to cross-sex hormones, I will stop, I made a mistake, will Jazz's penis develop into a fully male-sized, adult male-sized penis? We don't know. It seems unlikely, but we don't know because we haven't tested this. So it seems that once we start, we also don't know the effects on the developing adolescent brain. So puberty, what happens at puberty is the release of sex hormones triggers the enormous changes in the adolescent brain at puberty. Now, if those sex hormones are blocked until the age of 16, when the opposite sex hormones are introduced, what does that do to the developing adolescent brain? Because there are enormous changes, really crucial changes going on in the brain at that time. We don't know the answer to that question. So we're really, this is a real experiment. We have no data because this is so recent that we don't have any long-term studies.
What's convincing parents that this is a good option for their children and this is something that makes sense?
Because I think of the enormous sort of propaganda around trans kids, and if you can look at the media, you can look at transgender organisations and the power that they have had. It's a real political movement. It's not a health movement.
Right.
It's a political movement, and so it's a sort of it's framed as a human rights movement, and it's linked to LGBT, so lesbian, gay, bisexual. We think, well, we have to protect the rights of these sexual minority groups, but transgender is something completely different. We accept, and you know, somebody who has same-sex orientation is a different thing to accepting that a boy is literally a girl and needs to therefore change their body irreversibly to achieve the cosmetic appearance of the opposite sex. That's a completely different thing.
Right, I agree. What is it that's giving, I mean, this just amazes me that, you know, children can't vote. They can't buy cigarettes. They can't go in bars. They can't buy liquor. They can't sign contracts. They can't get married. All of these parameters we have around youth to protect them, but suddenly a 4 or 5-year-old can make a decision that impacts their body for the rest of their life.
And essentially they are making that decision because we know that they don't tend to come off the medical pathway once they start. It could be age 10, 11 or 12. They are making the decision to be infertile because if they take puberty blockers at Tanner stage 2 and then progress to cross-sex hormones at age 16, they are infertile because eggs or sperm have not developed. So essentially they're making the decision. Now, fertility is a human right. We protect that you know, that's sort of we protect that right. So if you're a woman and you try and get sterilized at age 30, you try and do that because the doctors won't allow it. It's like, you might change your mind, you might change your mind.
Exactly.
It's a very jealously guarded human right. And yet with children, we know that they are essentially making this decision at an age when they have just started puberty, and no child has the understanding to really know what they're doing at that age.
Are there some medical professionals that are referring this to referencing this as child abuse, or is everyone in accord?
There are, I think, there are certain professionals who are speaking up about it. Paul McHugh in the States has written very well about the effects of puberty blockers, and is saying that no child should be making that decision until psychosexual development is complete. Now, I think because the teenage brain doesn't finish its development until age 25, and you're looking at a risk-taking brain, a brain that can't weigh up future consequences against.
Right.
So it's not possible at that age. It's also not possible to imagine, being, even if you're a girl, it's not possible to imagine what it is to be a woman. And certainly for a boy, it's not possible to imagine what it's like to be an adult woman and decide that's who I am. Because a child, of course, can only know who they are at the age they are. A 4-year-old boy can only know himself as a 4-year-old boy. A teenage girl can only know herself as a teenage girl. We cannot project, well, none of us really can project into the future and know, but particularly children cannot predict what they will be like as men or women when they're children.
It amazes me that people take this so seriously, because I remember when my daughter was about, I don't know, between, I say 5 and 7, she had this fixation that she was a lion. Now,
Yes.
she would actually go around
Yeah.
and growling at people.
Yeah.
It was crazy. It was the weirdest thing. She grew out of it. I mean, but I'm kind of projecting that if I had believed, say she said, I'm a boy, and with that same fervor, that she swore up and down that she was a lion, what in the world? To me, it's the same thing. It's just a kid playing a role playing, using their imagination.
I do think when we're talking about children, that is a fair analogy, actually, because children do live in a make-believe world, and you know that when a child says, I'm a lion, they mean it. Right. They absolutely mean it. It is reality to a child because they are at the stage of magical thinking. And of course, as adults, we say, yes, you are. We know that stage of childhood, that children do actually believe what they think they are. And they're also logical thinkers, it's or concrete thinkers. So it's literally true, this magical thinking. Right. And I can create with my mind, it is possible to create with my mind a reality. And that's,
so
it's a wonderful aspect of being a child. So yes, I think it is a fair, it seems a bit flip, but I think it is a fair enough analogy, actually, to say what a child believes is not necessarily true. And we are encouraged as parents. What I hear a lot, we must listen to our children, and they know who they are. Well, I think it's very important to listen to children, but it doesn't mean we have to believe children and validate their beliefs. We can still disagree with them. We can still, as adults, understand reality and teach our children about reality, while at the same time supporting them. We're given this message that the only way to support a child is to agree and to affirm that their identity is true. And that's actually, if you think about it, it's a very, very extreme reaction to a child. A little boy who says, I'm a girl, and the parent says, yes, you are a girl. That is a really extreme response, because the little boy will never grow up to be an adult woman. That's just reality, and the reality is tough, but that is the reality. But of course, children believe parents, children believe adults. Why wouldn't they? They trust their parents, they trust their teachers.
Right.
And if every trusted adult is saying, yes, you are a girl, that's, it's so obvious that then that will have a self-fulfilling effect, that the child will believe.
But once the child gets around children, female children that actually are girls and that, identify as girls, and this child sees, hey, I'm not like those girls, what am I? Wouldn't that cause some kind of really serious conflict and emotional disturbance and mental breakdown in this child?
Well, I've heard that parents tell their little boys, some girls have penises. You're just a little girl with a penis. Well, but I mean, that's the logical extension of this ideology, isn't it? If you're biologically male and you're a girl, then girls have penises. I mean, that's what automatically follows.
I see. All right. Well, I was wondering, Also, I was kind of looking at some statistics where a study where a doctor was saying that it's better to, to go along with this because of the high rate of suicides
Yes.
amongst children who are denied the hormones and
Yeah.
the sex change operation and all of this. But on the flip side, there seems to be a super high rate of suicide on the for those who actually did transition. So what is going on with that? What are your take
Actually,
on it?
yes. Actually, when you asked me about parents, that's a big thing, and I think this is the key issue that parents are told that if they don't support their child to transition, then their child has a greater likelihood of committing suicide. So that suicide threat, which I think is the cruelest emotional blackmail that you could possibly give to a parent, because what parent wouldn't do anything to stop their child committing
Oh
suicide?
yeah.
So I think that message is awful. But the, there are lots of things around that as well. That the suicide, most of the suicide studies that we see of children cannot be extrapolated into the wider population because they're self-selecting studies. They're not controlled studies, so they could be. In other words, they don't know who's responding to them.
I see.
They don't know whether the child has pre-existing mental health issues, which would be a major factor. So, for example, in this country, there was a school survey done by Stonewall, and in that survey, again, the high rate, 48% think suicidal ideation in trans kids. What we don't know is how many of those children had coexisting. So there's a high rate of anxiety, depression, self-harm, body hatred, disassociation, particularly amongst teenage girls, which is an unfortunately common occurrence in adolescent teenage girls. We know this. We
Right.
know high.
It's regular, right?
Yes, and now they've got a new way of understanding why they feel that way. I'm really a boy. I hate my body. I hate my developing female body. I must be a boy. They've got a different model of understanding being presented to them. But yes, so the suicidal ideation, there could be lots of reasons behind it. If in this country, and it's the same all over the world, it's around 70% of teenagers presenting to gender identity clinics are girls, and that's a very sudden
Really?
change. Yes, it's and this is a completely new phenomenon. In the late 60s, 90% of transsexual adults were male, and now at gender clinics there've been tiny numbers up till around 2009 and then suddenly it sort of shot off the graph, the numbers of children being referred to
Wow.
identity clinics. But yes, it's around 74.5% of teenagers are girls, almost 70% of overall referrals are girls in the UK. That's reflected in Canada, in the US, in Australia, in the Netherlands, everywhere. And this has been termed rapid onset gender dysphoria because these girls have had no previous indication of any unhappiness, and suddenly they're identifying as transgender. So we don't understand,
I have
why
a
they are
theory.
taking. Yes, I think we all have theories about why. I mean, it's quite obvious when gender identity has been taught in schools in this country since at least 2008, that children are being taught in school that they have a gender identity which is so strong it overrides biological sex, and gender identity is the real indicator of whether you're a boy or a girl and not your biology. So we're
Why is
teaching.
this? What's? Do you have any theories about what's behind the push to get this drum this into children's heads, often
I
against the
think it's
parents' wishes? It's not like a normal school curriculum. You don't get tested for this on the SAT. So, I mean, why is this being pushed in
I
schools so
think
hard?
there are a combination of factors. I think there is that feeling that we let down the gay community. We didn't give, same-sex marriage, gay rights. We feel a collective guilt about not recognizing the rights of gay people quickly enough. And we're making up for it now by going overboard with trans rights. And I think the trans lobby has really worked hard to, you know, it's now LGBT, it's not L, so that they've really, you know, they're sort of traveling on the coattails of the LGB movement. But I think there are, and I think there's a certain naivety, certainly in government, in the medical profession, in that these people know what they're talking about. These people are the experts, and yet what we're seeing is there are parents of trans kids. There are people who are not experts in child development and psychology. They're not medical experts. They're not researchers or clinicians. They're either parents or they're trans people themselves. And so what we're getting is the experts are people who have a very strong political agenda, and they're influencing education and health. And in fact, we know that out of all the studies of gender dysphoric children from the past, taking all of those studies together, the rate of children who desist from that cross-sex identity is around 80%. So that most children grow out of gender dysphoria during puberty. We also know that a very large proportion of those children will turn out to be gay or lesbian as adults and not transsexual.
Oh, really?
Yes, yeah, and this is acknowledged by WPATH, which is the World Professional Association for Transgender Health. It's acknowledged by everybody that that's the most likely outcome. But we're seeing that it's the people who didn't grow out of it, the trans adults, are dictating policy on the treatment of these children. And I wonder why we're not getting people who did grow out of it to have influence on policy towards children. It's almost like getting women who did not grow out of body dysmorphia teaching and dictating treatment for young girls suffering body dysmorphia. You would want you'd want some input from people who grew out of it.
For a balanced view.
Well, it's the most likely outcome. So trans people themselves, adults, of course, can only see one outcome, trans. That's me when I was a child. So that child will be trans. We cannot say what the outcome will be of any child. We don't know. We know that there's a correlation between the more extreme gender dysphoria. Those kids are more likely to have a transsexual outcome, but even in those cases, children desist. So there's no way of knowing for an individual child whether they will grow out of it or whether they won't.
During this protocol, Stephanie, is mental health counseling a part of this program, or they just give them the drugs and just say, oh, well, you're trans?
No, I think this is the biggest scandal. You know, we've just heard that 35% of teenage referrals to the Tavistock Clinic in London are autism spectrum children. I think this is a tipping time bomb, because autism spectrum children do have problems with gender. They have problems with fitting in. They have problems with an autism spectrum girl will have difficulty in understanding the very complicated social rules that girls have in their interaction. And they tend to be bullied, very highly bullied, autistic kids, and they tend to have high suicidal ideation again, and they feel different, they feel left out. Any kid that feels different basically is quite vulnerable to have it, to understand, to this model of understanding themselves. It's the kids, I think, that would have been goths and emos, you know, all the
yes, that was from my era.
Yes, yeah, and or punks, or you know, it's the kids, or the geeks, the computer nerds, all of those kids who don't fit into the kind of stereotypical boy and girl boxes.
Oh my God.
I think that's what we're seeing. And these kids do tend to have pre-existing mental health, psychological health issues, and again, that will inflate the suicidal ideation stats, which we're told are only because they're trans, no other reason. But it also makes them very, very vulnerable, because essentially there is only a medical pathway. Once the diagnosis is gender dysphoria, and I hear from parents all the time, and I know this is happening in the UK, and I hear from parents in the US as well, in fact all over that's happening, that no other mental health support is available. Once a child identifies as transgender, they have to be affirmed. And I know that there are bans on conversion therapy, gay conversion therapy, and those, and in the States, I think it's 12 states now in the US have added gender identity to the ban on conversion therapy. So what was gay conversion therapy, which I think everybody agrees is wrong. There were some very cruel methods used in the past to try to convert somebody who's same-sex attracted to. But now, if you add gender identity, you're not allowed to convert a gender identity. Now, there's no scientific evidence that we have this thing called a gender identity anyway. It's a made-up concept. It's an idea that we have this sort of innate, deep feeling of being male or female, which is unrelated and completely independent of our biology and our socialization. That's also happened in the UK. The UK Council of Psychotherapists has added gender identity to what is called the Memorandum of Understanding on Conversion Therapy. And what that means is no therapist dare explore underlying issues with a client who says I'm transgender. So a teenage girl comes in, she's I'm a boy, and the therapist will just say, well, what pronouns he, and affirm that the girl is a boy. And therapists now, if they explore underlying issues and find out what's led to that, so that the child really understands what they're doing and what they mean by I'm a boy, and what possible background factors have led to that. And if that child then says, oh no, actually I am a girl, I got that, the therapist may be accused of conversion therapy.
Oh my God, are you kidding me?
No, this is going on. This is going on everywhere. It's everywhere you turn.
It's like you're just being forced to go along with the delusions, because I'm going to go out here and that's what I'm going to say. Since there's no scientific proof that any of this is real, these are delusions that are being promoted as reality, groundless facts. There's nothing factual about it. And parents are being forced, railroaded by laws and threats to go along with this stuff. That's what I'm hearing here.
Yes, and the media presents parents who affirm their children as supportive and the children as brave, and so this message is being pushed on parents, everywhere we look across the media. But parents who refuse to believe that their daughter is now their son, or their son is now their daughter, are seen as bigoted, transphobic parents. And there's also the growing threat and fear of parents that their children may be taken away from them. Transgender youth support groups are talking about getting social services involved if the parent doesn't affirm, as if there is only one way to support a child. So we have this real black and white. You either affirm your child or you're a nasty, bigoted, unsupportive parent. Of course, you can support your child's gender expression, you can support your child to be who they are, but you can also retain your adult responsibility to teach your child about reality. It's a really, really difficult road to take, because these kids are being told online in trans forums on Tumblr and various social media sites that if their parents don't fully affirm them and allow them to have medical transition, then their parents are transphobic bigots. And this is an attempt, and you see this from transgender support groups, there's this attempt to separate, to separate the child from the family. And although, that there are some parents who are horrible, I know, but most parents, we have to support most parents, or acknowledge that most parents have the best interests of their child at heart, that they will want to do their best for their child. In any
Right.
other area, the parent who does research, the parent who really looks into it, who looks at the side effects of these medications, who recognizes that their daughter taking testosterone at age 16, she will have irreversible effects on her body that she will never be able to change back. Parents who understand about the development of the adolescent brain, parents who are really informed and cannot support this for their children, but are trying to support their children, to hold the space, to allow them to express themselves, to keep up communication, keep up a good relationship. It's a really difficult tightrope to walk. Families are going through hell because there's no support anywhere around them. They go to, in this country, it's CAMS, the mental health services, where their child will be affirmed. Parents can't find therapists, and therefore they have to try and find a private therapist who will explore underlying issues rather than simply affirm their child. But these parents have nowhere to turn. They are being told by mental health services, you must affirm your child.
What a nightmare. That wouldn't
It
have
is,
went down at my house, though. I could just
yeah.
imagine my brother coming in talking about I'm a girl, and my father saying I'll girl you. And so it's like we didn't.
Well,
That would.
yeah, it does feel like being in an Orwellian nightmare, that
It
suddenly
does.
everybody is saying your daughter is now your son, and isn't he brave? And giving all this attention to your brave son. And I'm hearing this from parents that they, that they as the parent have to sort of shut up and be really, really careful, because if they're seen as transphobic, they feel under, serious threat. We also
What
have
about
school.
the children, Stephanie? Okay, so that's a very small segment of the population. What about all the children who identify as what they are, having these kids forced on them? Like, I would feel really bad about my daughter having to be in a locker room seeing some guy's genitals, even though he says he's a girl. He has all the equipment that can sexually assault anybody in there. And this has happened in a prison recently here in the United
Yes.
States. This guy said he was and promptly raped 4 women in the prison. And this is a fear that I think a lot of parents have, and it's confusing millions of children who identify with what they physically look like. Isn't anybody focusing
Well,
on the damage that's being done to these children?
yeah, and I wouldn't even say that kids identify. Like as a child, I didn't identify as a girl. I knew
Yeah,
I was a girl. I think this
yeah,
whole idea that we identify is rubbish. We don't identify, do we? We know that we are, but we don't necessarily. I mean, I certainly don't necessarily identify with feminine things or the position of women in society. I don't identify with all of that. I don't even
right.
identify with gender stereotypes. I know that I'm a woman because I'm biologically female. But yes, I think it's another thing that I think we're creating mental health problems because we're encouraging children to explore their gender identity. So we're saying to children, you've all got a gender identity, and it's really good to explore your gender identity. Well, what that means is that all these kids are looking at their personalities and all their interests and thinking, does that mean I'm a boy or a girl, or and that kind of inward looking, you must relate everything to your gender, I think is really unhealthy.
Right.
But for children who, so for particular, actually boys and girls, I mean, I've heard it from both sides that boys, uh, you know, you, you know you know that your classmate is one sex, and they come back the following term as the opposite sex, and they come into your locker room or your toilet, and you're supposed to, and all the teachers are saying, he is a, you know, this teenage boy who you know is your classmate is now a girl, and you have to say, yes, she's a girl. It's gaslighting. You know, we all know that actually he's male, he's a
Right.
boy, a teenage boy, but we all have to play the game and say, no, she's a girl, and feel suddenly magically comfortable about a biological male getting changed in front of us, or watching it, or us getting changed in front of him. And it's not so much, I mean, I know that if ever we talk about this aspect, we're told that we're scaremongering, or we're accusing trans kids of being sexual predators. And the fact is that, you know, we with males, we don't know. It's the reason we have sex segregated facilities in the first place, for privacy for both sexes, but also for girls, that added safety.
Correct.
And so, you know, a boy who identifies as a girl may still be heterosexual and may still fancy girls, and that still might lead to something. In fact, I have heard stories. You know, trans kids are not magically angels. You know,
Right.
as you know, we can't assume that, and we're not accusing trans kids of being sexual predators. I think the more important thing here is one that all children have a right to have boundaries with the opposite sex, and that's an inviolable right in my view, that you are able, but particularly for girls, that girls especially have the right to say no to males in their private spaces where they're vulnerable, where they're getting undressed or using the toilet. They have the right to their boundaries, and they have the right to express those boundaries. But calling a boy a girl, they're suddenly transphobic, and these girls are being called bigoted for having those healthy boundaries
Right.
where, well, you know, they have a right to those boundaries. And what really worries me is that girls are being shamed out of having any boundaries at all, or using their intuition. So if any boy, we must say he's a girl. Any boy, any man
Right.
can say, I'm a woman, and a girl must accept you're a woman. Otherwise, it's transphobic and bigoted. That's
Exactly.
absolute opposite message we should be giving to girls. Girls are too polite anyway. Girls get themselves into dangerous situations because they're too polite, because they're worried about hurting his feelings. They will put themselves in risky situations. And we need to be teaching our girls, no, risk hurting his feelings. Don't put yourself in a compromising or risky situation. We're doing the opposite here. We're saying you're not allowed. In this one particular case, any man who says he's a woman, you have to accept him as a woman, and therefore invite him into your personal private space. That
Yeah,
is
see, I
really,
disagree with that so much.
yeah. Well, this means that girl, it's not just here and now in this school. It means that girls are being groomed into pushing down their instincts about somebody who's male, and that will affect them in relationships outside of school as they grow up. That they, that they do not have the right to question any man who says I'm a woman. That is dangerous for girls.
This is
Yeah,
frightening.
it's not good news, is it?
No, and it is something that I've, worried about myself, because it seems, any man could just wake up one morning, put on a wig, even with his full beard and everything, put on a wig and
Mm.
some kind of dress he got at Goodwill or whatever, and walk around into women's spaces and say that I'm a woman. And,
Yes,
where are you a woman? You're still a guy. So what
yes.
part of this, with your beard and your everything, your testosterone, makes you a
Your
woman?
penis.
Exactly.
Yes.
I'm
Yes.
like, how does this work? I feel like I'm in that book I used to read when I was a little kid called The Emperor's New Clothes, where everyone says,
Yeah.
oh my God, his clothes are so fabulous. And the guy is just butt naked. And it's like,
Yeah.
and it took a child to say, no, he has no clothes on. This is the
Yeah.
same thing. You're
Yes.
not a woman. So I'm just really, this thing is really bothering me. And I'm glad you made yourself
Well,
available
yes,
to
and
answer these questions.
trans people deserve respect, deserve human rights, and deserve not to be discriminated against. And I think, people speaking out. I think everybody. This is not transphobic. Yes, you have a right to live in safety and peace and have access to the same rights as everybody else. I think everybody is, but just to actually force everybody to deny biological reality. And I think actually um, the older, transsexuals do not agree with this gender identity. The sort of, old-fashioned transsexuals. It was seen as a condition that was quite rare, but deserved compassion, and
Right.
we allowed for it because as a society, we look after the most vulnerable people, and I absolutely, that. But that's a different thing to what's happening now. Now we're
Right.
being told that gender identity, biological sex, doesn't exist. It's irrelevant. We've made that up. It doesn't exist. Women have penises, men have vaginas. It's like male and female biological sex is an illusion, and somehow this sort of magical spirit, soul, gender identity in our heads that is the reality, and that goes for all of us. So we can only be a woman now if we identify as a woman. We are, we're called cisgendered women because we must have a gender identity to be a woman.
Yeah, well, I rebuke that because I don't want anybody who's not like me telling me what I am. You don't get to call me
Especially
sis.
somebody male,
Exactly.
telling
They have
me
too
what a
many
woman
names
is.
for us now that are unflattering and derogatory and downright insulting. And to me, that's
Mm.
just another one of them. So anybody, no, you don't get to call me that. I'm the woman and you're not. That's how that goes.
Yes, and
So,
woman. The word woman doesn't need a prefix. It's
exactly.
a, a,
Well,
you
I
know,
don't want to keep you here all day because I definitely could asking you question after
yeah,
question.
yeah.
But I really wanted to know for parents, I'm sure this is going to be a wake up call for a lot of people that, you're sharing information that people just really did not know how deep this goes. So
Mm.
if someone wants to find out more information or become involved in a pushback movement, what should they do?
Go and have a look at transgendertrend.com, have a read of it. Have a look at Fourth Wave Now. Excellent. It's fourthwavenow.com,
Okay.
um, which is an excellent site in the States. She is a brilliant writer, and you'll be absolutely shocked by what you read on that website. I think parents do have power. We're seeing pushbacks from parents in the States, in Canada, in the UK. We've published a schools resource pack on transgender trend for parents to take into their child's school. And our schools packet explains the difference between gender and sex very clearly, because I think a lot of what's happening is also because of this confusion between those two words.
Right.
And gender, they don't mean the same thing. We're men and women based on our biological sex. That's just fact. That's what those words mean. Gender is a social construction. It's masculinity and femininity. It's how it's how women should behave and how men should
Right.
behave. The stereotypes really, and of course that changes over history, and different things are
In
expected of
different
men
cultures. Right.
and in different cultures. So the transgender trend schools pack explains the difference between sex and gender and encourages schools to teach children the difference and to challenge gender stereotypes, to allow children to express themselves and not be restricted by gender stereotypes, but also to recognise and respect the differences between the two sexes. You can do both things. And so helping children to realize that challenging gender stereotypes doesn't mean they have to change sex, because they're only moving from one stereotype to the opposite stereotype.
Yeah, that's what I was like. What do you mean there's no stereotype? You're perpetuating it with this switch.
It's just reinforcing stereotypes. To think that you're a boy because you like having short hair and tattoos, you know, that's a stereotype.
Right.
You can be female and still do that, you know. So yeah, I'd really encourage parents, you know, have a look. You can download it for free from the website.
Okay.
I would really encourage parents to challenge their schools. I think when you talk about this issue to other adults, you know, at the school gates, it's really scary, because people who question it are painted as bigots. So you have to, I think you do have to be careful you when you start talking to people about it. But what I think you'll find is that other people have concerns too and are
Right.
also not speaking up. So just, you know, broach the subject, talk about it, be a bit careful. But I think you'll find that there'll be other parents who feel the same way as you. And when there's a group of you, then you can ask your school, what are you teaching about gender identity in this school? What are your policies on locker rooms and toilet bathrooms? You know,
Right.
and start to say, we do not want this. We want our, you know, we want our child's boundaries to be respected, and we want children to be taught that boundaries are important and they have a right to those boundaries. So we, you know, once you get together with other parents, parents do have power. Schools will listen to a group of parents. So that's what I would also say. Whenever you see anything, you know, say something in the media, and I think when you see a completely cheerleading child transition piece on TV or in a newspaper, write your comment, complain to the editor, say we want balance,
Right.
reporting. What are the dangers of these drugs we're giving to children? What are the side effects? Where's the research to show that they're effective and they're not harmful? You know, actually start asking your media these questions, and don't put up with the one-sided media coverage.
Well, I appreciate it, Stephanie. This is mind-boggling. I'm going to do and try to get this online as quickly as possible so that everybody can see this great interview. You've given me a lot of food for thought. By the way, I don't mind being called transphobic. Like, to me, it's like, what? So, you know, it's like you call me that. How is that hurting me? Is it affecting my bank account? Is it changing anything in my life at all? But it's like, it's not a fear of being trans. It's phobia is the wrong word. It's a concern for what that is doing to the mind of my child and other children who don't understand what's going on. That's not a phobia. That is parental concern. And so I think there's a big difference, and people should learn
every
from that.
parent has the right to voice those concerns without being labeled
exactly.
It's
like I don't want my child to be around people who do drugs or, you know, who cut and all this kind of stuff. You know, there's certain things as a parent you want to have the time to explain to your child what that thing is. And this right is being denied parents. It's just being
and you don't want your child to, it's like being taught creationism in school. You don't want your child being taught an ideology in schools, and but an ideology disguised as fact.
Right.
You don't want that. You know, that's not education. You want your child to be taught facts. I've got another website for you. It's a new one, but it's and I'll read this. I've just got it written down here because I've only just been sent it. But it's professionals, it's clinicians. So it might be interesting for your viewers to see this. This is professionals who are speaking out. And there are a few. So this is at gdworkinggroup.org. So GD, it must be gender dysphoria, gdworkinggroup.org.
Okay.
Have a look at that, because there'll be some interesting, I know there'll be some interesting pieces on there. from the point of view of professionals. And I think, you know, the reason I set up Transgender Trend was that there was nothing online, apart from Fourth Wave Now, the website that I told you must look at, but there was nothing to help parents were looking for information. All they could find was trans propaganda
Right.
sites. You must affirm your child, and this is, you know, this is innate. They are trans, and so I set up Transgender Trend to provide an alternative source which was evidence-based and, you know, based on information and research to help parents see that there was an alternative out there. So I think for parents who are worried, this new website of professionals will reassure them that, you know, that
That's
there's,
excellent.
yeah.
Well, I thank you so much for stopping being, you know, she's in the UK and I'm here in the US. So we had to really work to coordinate our times and make this happen. But I'm so glad that you worked with me on this, Stephanie. I really, 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 more than you know, appreciate
Great.
it.
Well, thank you for inviting me on. I think it's a really important subject that most people are avoiding. So I really appreciate you inviting me on and talking about it. Thank you.
Oh, this is dynamic. Thank you, and we will speak soon. And I will be
Yes.
sure to send you the link when everything is
Fantastic. Thank you.
edited. All right. Thank you, and bye bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.